Great. So, hi everyone. My name is Adeo Resi. I'm going to be the moderator today for discussing how emerging managers are closing in uncertain times. I'm the CEO of Dessel Group, and I'm really excited to be joined by three amazing managers. We'll do ladies first here. Jessica Kamada. Wow, really honored to have you. Is that correct that you recently closed your fund?
Yes, we closed in February. So hopefully
Wow.
hindsight is 2020 and we can share some fresh insights here.
That's awesome. So actually you can go into detail about your fund as well. So what if you don't mind quickly introducing yourself, then I'll go to you, Ollie, and then last but not least, John. So Jessica.
Sure. My name is Jess Kamada. I'm based in Seattle. I'm the managing partner of Swizzle Ventures, and my background is in growth. I came to VC as a growth operator. And today our mission is to advance women's health and wealth through pivotal life stages. We invest in three sectors: women's healthcare, caregiving, and financial health in pre-seed and seed.
Congrats. So Jessica can talk about her firm and fund because she has done the final close. Now, Ollie, I know you haven't closed yet, right? But you're super close. So Ollie, you can introduce yourself, but you can't, and your past track record, but because Ollie is still in the throes of closing, he can't go into details about what his fund is doing. So shoot, Ollie.
Yeah. Great to be here. Ali Jamal. I was in cohort 8, and it's crazy how quickly everything kind of changes and how fast things can happen. Um, Before kind of joining VC Lab, I was pretty active as a syndicate lead on AngelList, and had done a bunch of deals there, but going through VC Lab, going through the process really helps kind of define everything you're about, that the thought process behind your thesis, who your target LPs are. It really kind of refines a lot of what you're doing. So I'm super grateful for the program, and great to be here and kind of help spread the word of what this process is like, because nobody tells you when you start what it's going to end up being like, but it's been a crazy, long, challenging process, especially the last 2 years. When you think about kind of cohort 8, and when it was kind of right at the end of 22, and seeing crypto crash, it's come back, crypto crashing, all these things that have happened. We had SVB, FTX. Like, there's just been all these things that have kind of happened over these last 2 years that send shocks through the environment, questions from LPs. And so it's been a really interesting time. And I think it's getting even more interesting kind of post-election and everything that's been shaping up over the last 6 months as well. So, there's probably no perfect time to fundraise, but I think these challenging times make it a little bit more interesting for everybody.
Certainly memorable. So, John, hey, speaking of challenging times, uh, how are you doing? Introduce yourself, and
Yes, thank you, Adair. John Roberts from Boot 64 Ventures. We're a two-person GP firm. We did close the fund in April of 24 and we're on our third capital call coming up later this month. So we are in the fund stages. We are pre-seed focused funds on the Gulf Coast of the United States, with a focus on Louisiana economic impact. We're writing checks from 100 to 100 and from 100 to 500,000. We have 19 portfolio companies so far.
are you on the road today?
I am. I'm in DC. I'm at a conference. I didn't wear this for you, Adele, even though you chide me about my attire occasionally.
Nothing like a lot. Very interesting. Well, hopefully DC is treating you well. So yeah, maybe I'll start throwing some questions out that I think everybody is curious about. Which and Ali, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, it's not just been an uncertain time now, it's been kind of an uncertain time for the last couple of years, right? You've had, as you brought up, FTX, SVB, markets going up, markets going down in crypto and the stock market right now. I would say, I don't know if I call it peak uncertainty, but there's definitely a lot of uncertainty. And maybe we could just hear, and each one of you, how you've adapted your mindset to deal with the externalities and just close anyway. And so whoever wants to go first, you can put your finger up or just start talking.
Yeah, I can go first. I think so. I was in cohort 11. We started VC Lab June of 2023, just to like set the time frame. Um, and that was a very hard year to fundraise. And then the next year was election and all of that uncertainty that came. So the first thing that I definitely credit VC Lab for was to basically say, don't don't talk to anyone who you know is not going to invest, aka like institutions. Like just do not go there. And so the something that we did that worked really well was try to find pockets of capital that were not dated by this mess. Because the one thing that I think um and then we just started finding that and getting momentum that way, and then you have the momentum that you can speak to. But that was a huge learning from a mindset perspective. um I mean, I think having a sales background really helps you because you already have that thick skin, but you got to thicken up the skin. Like you're going to go through a lot of no's. I think Adeo, it was also like really helpful when you said, top closers are only converting about 20% of the time. So, okay, so
That's
80%
top.
of the time, that's top. So like 80% or more, you're going to get a no. And just having that expectation set, I think from a mindset perspective was helpful. Like it's not personal. Those aren't your people. Go find your people. Go find people that are willing to invest in these market conditions. Because the other thing is that in 23, if you have a brand new fund, you have no baggage from 2021. You have a fresh start. And you're investing at the best time. Like we had amazing valuations in 23 because no one was deploying. So for people that were, you got in like really at this ground level of this trough. And that's the context that I tried to convey.
Yeah, and I mean, you struggled, and then all of a sudden things started to click, is my understanding, and then you really had a takeoff moment. Do
Yeah.
you know what might have led to that? And in the middle of the uncertainty and chaos, you had this click, and then it just like broke loose, if you will. Do you have a
Yep.
sense of what that was, or it's so fresh?
There were like two moments. So early days in the pitching process, it was like I found my LP archetype. And once I found that, once it clicked, then it was like, okay, let me just go find more of them. And then I started asking for referrals, like that started moving pretty well. The second major point, um, so just from a timeline perspective, started VC Lab June 23, did my first close when I graduated in November 23. So that first click was kind of at the tail end of me doing that first close. Got to 3 million, which was my initial target, Q1 24. And then it was like slow, pretty slow from April 24 through the election. And I was like, I really hope this is going to come together. Like this, we're having LPs trickle in, trickle in. But it really clicked when the election results were announced. We announced our final closing. We announced some great traction in the portfolio. And from a macro perspective, some people, half the country was pissed about the election result. And high net worths saw their portfolio jump. And they're like, interesting. Things are looking pretty good for me right now. I really like your mission. I like you. I like what you're doing. Like now is the time. And they were willing to pull that trigger like in that moment. So I raised about 2 million between the election being announced and end of year. And
Wow.
so my sweet spot was like end of election through inauguration day. And then I shut it down.
All right. You're like, I don't know. I need more chaos. You know, it's very interesting. You brought so many great points up, and Ali, you're next. But like this idea for everybody, the LP archetype, the perfect type of person that gets your fund. And then the second really salient point too is like timing may look bad for some, right? But it could be good for you, right? So you got to find out how to take news. Like I'll give you an example. Right now, the markets are all chaotic, but there's trillions of dollars of investor capital that has been pulled out of the market that's sitting on the sidelines. And so that's a pool of capital to go after. So if you can tune your messaging to the market conditions, that's a great suggestion. Ali, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think, I'm not a natural salesperson. Like I never actually had a role in sales before. And I think one of the things that was tricky for me is I think, and I don't know if it's just me, but growing up in like an immigrant household, it's like you're kind of trained not to like really talk about money and not to like have to go out and ask for money, right? And so like that was a big hurdle for me. I think like talking to even friends and family, right? Like you don't want to bring shame or something, to people. And so, you know, people that that had money, it's always this weird conversation. And so even though I'd raised a bunch before, it was always for a specific deal or I was showing people an opportunity. And then now when you're kind of making that transition to fundraising for a fund and people have to believe in you and I have to sell my own skills versus selling a deal, it was really tricky for me. And, I think I ended up having a conversation, um, with Mike and with the VC Lab team where they were like, the thing is that you're not really selling an opportunity, you're offering them an opportunity, right? Like the instead of thinking about it as them giving you money, right? They're getting in on the ground floor of something that's really going to be special, right? And the more that you can kind of believe that yourself, then the easier it is to like present yourself to other people. I think that was a big change for me where I'm no longer, oh, hey, I'm doing this and would like some cash, but I'm coming into the ground floor. I've already done all this work. I already have these deals that I've invested in the pipeline, and this is what I've done previously, and this is my track record. And I'm giving you a deal, right? Like I don't need the cash. I don't need these things. I'm really I actually know what I'm doing, and this is an opportunity because you know me and you're lucky, not the other way around. I think was a big transition mentally for me, and that I'm still
Ali,
trying
did
to
did Mike
really
tell you that you are the prize? Because
yes.
that's it works.
I mean, you are. I mean, Jessica, you're amazing. I mean, all three of you guys are amazing.
But
That's
that
why we're
line, I
here.
will tell you, that line I had to remind myself of multiple times, Ali, to your point.
And it was just like it was tricky for me to make that transition, and I still feel uncomfortable talking to you know some people about money or asking them for money, but no, they have it. But I think that transition and seeing people, you know, approach me or that had been recommended by other LPs and things like that, it really does start to help you kind of believe in it more.
And just for the record, everyone, Ali is not only one of the most prolific investors on AngelList, which says a lot because there are a lot of investors on AngelList. He's also one of the top performing. So it's not like he's coming in there and being like, "Hey, invest in me. I have no track record. I've never done this before. I don't have good returns." He's coming in with one of the most prolific track records, some of the best returns, etc. Um, Let me just double click. I mean, that was really fantastic. You are the prize, changing your mind set. And I know, especially if you're a bit shy, it can be really hard to kind of be pitching all the time, right? Is there any other like tips that you can give people? Because I right now in cohort 17, there's a lot of people that are like afraid to go talk to people about their thesis, people that they know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think one, just going out there and talking to people and getting feedback early is really, really critical. It helps shape a lot of it. And the questions they ask, and you can start putting that into your narrative more and more. And then I think one of the big things also for me was thinking about like my pitch and what I'm telling LPs the same way I think about it on the other side as a GP when startups pitch me. And so, what are the things that I care about um, as a um, as an investor, and what are the things that I get excited about? And can I rewrite my narrative in a way where I am getting these potential LPs excited the same way that I would be excited as a GP, right? And that might be different for everybody, but for me, it tends to be, what have you done? What's unique about you? What, like, how do you stand out from the rest of the crowd, right? You know, um, I think we all see this all the time where we get pitched a lot of very similar ideas all the time, and there's no moat and there's no distinction and there's no reason why this team, that we can understand is going to be extremely special. And so, trying to highlight why I think I'm going to be special and why I think I have a moat and the things I've done in the past that highlight that and are distinctive and even the progress we've made, so far in the fund and so far in the track record, right? I think is also important, and having, a warehouse of deals that you can kind of actually show represent, like that's sort of your customer feedback, right? Like that's sort of your initial, pilot program. And so being able to show all these things to your LPs or potential LPs, I think also really goes and helps clarify things for everybody.
I love that. Evaluate yourself like you would evaluate a deal. John, let's go over to you. You also had some great success, and you did something that a lot of people are unable to do. And maybe I'll let you have the punchline on that.
Well, first of all, I'd say a lot of what Jessica and Ali both have said really resonates. I experienced many of the same things. One thing, I don't know if you still, I'm assuming you still use the line of Deo that anything but a yes is a no. And that you have to take that to heart. It goes to what Jessica was talking about. Don't talk to people, if they're not giving you a yes and you've had 2 or 3 conversations with them, move on. You're probably spinning your wheels there. Another thing that worked for us, and I know there's a lot of solo GPs out there, but we had 2 GPs and we had a trusted venture partner who made a lot of introductions for us. We all 3 went to meetings, or if we were doing them online, we'd all be online, and we were able to give each other feedback about how the meeting had gone, and we were really able to refine our story. And so, even if you're a solo GP, I try and find a way to actually get a trusted associate or VP onto the calls with you so that you can get feedback afterwards, because having a silent person there reading what's happening in the room or on the call and the reactions of the potential LP, it was really helpful for us.
That's also great advice. The other day, because you can think something went really well, and actually it didn't. And in fact, I
Yeah.
just had this happen. We were pitching an LP, and I'm like, man, that went really well. And Mike's like, no, it didn't.
Yeah.
And maybe because I was just excited and he was reading the subtle clues that you can't see when you're presenting or what talking through things you might not notice. So that's a really great piece of advice. Let me go back and I have another question for you guys, and of course get those questions in the Q&A as well for the listeners here. You must have heard some objections. And oh, crypto's down, so I'm not in. The election's coming in a few days, so I'm not in, right? I'm sure I'm here. I see you nodding a little bit, John, and I'm sure you, Ali. So maybe like tell me like some of those objections we all know are just really a no, masquerading as like some other thing. You know, it's like I'm not going to invest, and I'm just saying it's because of the election, but it's really because I just don't want to do it, right? But like, how did you deal with objections, and were you able to overcome any of them in these uncertain times, particularly like uncertainty objections? So whoever wants to take that one first, please go ahead.
I mean, I'd say that, of course, we did have objections and stuff, and most of the time we did take it as, well, they're not interested. But there were times that we were able to follow up after the meeting. I can't really recall any time that in an actual call or meeting we suddenly came up with the answer to, overcome an objection. But we did follow up sometimes with information, a couple of things that really did work, and ended up getting somebody in as an LP.
Yeah. I think well, for one, I would say there's a difference between questions and objections. So sometimes, I mean, just like Ali was saying, like if you are diligencing a deal, like you have questions that you want to learn more about to understand if, like, to get you over the line, right? It's the same thing with us. So just because you get an LP asking you a question does not mean that it's an objection. Sometimes they just need like a little bit more to get to yes. Um, And I also learned that I'm a I'm a marketer by trade. So like I use this, um, it's very common that like a consumer needs like 7 touch points to a brand before committing to it. It's kind of the same here, right? So if it's your first conversation ever, like they might not say, like they're probably not going to say yes right on the the first 30-minute call, right? So they need like more touch points, your newsletter, an event, someone else saying you're awesome. Like they need those things. So again, not necessarily an objection, but for the objections that I did get, um as you can imagine, given our thesis, like we have a lot of female LPs and I pitched a lot of female LPs. Women don't like to say no right off the bat. So a no is a blessing, but a lot of no's were like, oh, it's not the right time, or like some kind of like it's a timing thing, or like, oh, like I'm redoing my house, so I need like, hit me up in 6 months. And for those people to come on your newsletter, um, follow up in 6 months, because a lot of people don't think you have the balls to actually do that. And I actually had multiple people, um, from I pitched them maybe in our first close, and they actually came in on the final close because I consistently sent a newsletter every month and I did what I said I was going to do. And we had performance to um to back it up at that point. So people were like kind of come out of the woodwork when you say, okay, final close, like you're in or you're out, right? Um and part of the objection that I had to get over was that I did not have a track record. I have a phenomenal operating track record. Um, I have like we did some deals off of the prior business that I built, but they were not in thesis, so I couldn't really use them. So yeah, like I couldn't do what Ali is saying, which was like, Ali has this like amazing angel track record of SPVs and he warehoused a bunch of things. Like I didn't have that. So I had to do this like more slow and steady thing, um, to prove out that I could build a track record while I was raising the fund. And that's why at the very end, like when it came around to final close, people were like, oh, like these are great deals. She got into some bangers here. And like, let's ride this thing. So that's how I did it. But yeah, newsletter is key for sure.
Well, so I think you said a lot of valuable things here. I want to double click on one thing that's really important. So the old adage in venture capital when it comes to dealing with LPs is say what you're going to do it, and then let them know you did it, right? And keep that communication flow open the whole way. say what you're going to do it, and tell them what you did, right? And that builds trust over time. And that's why, as you brought up, you got pitch people in the first close that came in the last close because they saw that you did exactly that, even though you didn't have the same track record as, let's say, Ali did. So, Ali, do you want to cover any objections and how you dealt with them?
Yeah, I think part of it is understanding what they're objecting to. Like, there's some things you can over time kind of convince people of. But if they're not interested at all in venture capital as an industry, or they're not interested in your thesis, right? There's very little you can do to change their minds. And so I think kind of taking a step back and figuring out what their real objections are. I think I'm also a little unique where, um, I really focus on um, and one of the big things for me is expanding the umbrella of venture capital. And so getting people who maybe haven't invested in a venture capital fund before to make a venture capital investment. And so that does involve some education. So it might involve educating them on what it's like to be an LP and the structure of VC. And it's going to take you maybe 10 or 15 years to see a return. And so some of that part of that process where maybe they're not objecting like between objecting to VC and just not knowing enough about it and spending that time educating them on it has also been a big part of it for me as well. And so I think understanding what the objections are and are they things that you can convince them of over a long period of time, or is it something that they're going to want to that just a fundamental difference they're not going to change? And then one of the big things is just finding ways to have I think like Jessica said, follow up check-ins. And so adding people to a newsletter, continue to show progress each month. That's also something that I like as an investor, right? When people add me to their newsletters and I see every month they're making progress, every month they're doing something, getting to see the new investments they're making, getting to see the progress those companies are making, getting to see more LP commitments, seeing, I talk about, if I'm going to a conference, if I'm presenting and sharing along some of the podcasts, things like that I've been on as well. And so I think letting people hear me in a different format than just me pitching, and have this variety of information being presented every month in a newsletter type format. And then, eventually people kind of learn more and maybe get excited more.
Did you beyond a newsletter, Ali, did you do other kinds of follow-up? Did you say, okay, this person's a little hotter, so I'm going to do a text or call, and this person, not so interested, they just get the newsletter? What was your
Yeah. So, um, one of the things is that along with the newsletter, I would usually send my teaser. And then with the teaser, I could see who was clicking on it, who was looking at it, how long they were looking at it. And so if somebody was looking at the teaser, multiple times or even tracking who's actually opening the newsletter and, there's links in the newsletter that are, to different articles I'm talking about or different portfolio companies. And so if somebody's going through the newsletter and clicking on 10 things, within an hour, it kind of shows that they're more interested than the ones that just open it or don't open it at all. And then, so the ones that showed that they were more actively interested, I would definitely follow up with a little bit more. And then, um, again, I think part of it is just not that comfortable being a salesperson. So trying not to push a ton, but just, sending a quick, like, hey, just checking in, are there any questions that I can answer? Or if you have, I'm hopping on this seminar or I'm doing a webinar with somebody or whatever and seeing who reacts. And then, also kind of just being active on LinkedIn and having articles and things like that where people can kind of, it's more kind of inbound from them that they're interacting with me, but seeing what those interactions are like.
It's like Jessica's 7 touch points to get someone. That was also great advice, Jessica. I want to ask, there's so many great questions coming in. I want to get to the questions from the audience, but before I do, all three of you are kind of Ali, you're at the end, and Jessica and John, you've finished fundraising again. Congratulations. If you were to look back at yourself, however many months and years ago when you started the fundraising process, and you could like give yourself like one or two salient pieces of advice to maintain your sanity and be more effective, I'd love to hear what you would tell your earlier self entering the journey as something possibly instructive to many of the people on the call that are starting the journey now or shortly. Who wants to go first with that one? John, all right.
Well, the first one's easy. Stick with the program. I mean, literally, the VC Lab program works, and so it got us through the ups and the downs and the office hours and everything else that we needed to be successful. So that would be my first point of advice. But secondarily, sometimes think about like one of the things that I just stumbled across. I didn't realize it until after it happened for the first time. I was in an angel network, 100 and something members. And we had members who kept on paying their dues, but they never came to meetings or made investments, but they wanted to be in the space. And so those actually turned out to be good targets. We got 4 LPs from going to talk to angels that we knew that were not active angels, but they kept paying for their membership. So we gave them exposure to the space. And the other thing that really worked for us is we found a venture partner who had recently retired as a commercial banker and was able to make a lot of introductions for us because she knew who had sold her companies and who had money and such. And so if you can find somebody like that as a connector, that really worked well for us as well.
Wow, that was really interesting. These angels that clearly want to be angels because they're paying dues, but haven't made it. It's funny. That's a great little. Who wants to go next? Okay,
I
Ali,
think
and then Jessica.
I think one of the things that I would kind of tell myself is just to be consistent throughout. I think, I started and I was like, okay, I need to go get LPs. And then I had some LPs, and then I was like, okay, now I need to go get deals. And then you kind of like switch back and forth, right? And I think one of the things that VC Lab said is just be consistent throughout. But I don't know if I necessarily did that. And so I think making sure that I'm consistently talking to potential LPs, consistently getting deal flow, not try to switch back and forth between those. And I think the second that you start taking a break off of one or take your eye off of it, it really slows everything down and it makes it twice as hard to restart. And so I think just trying to be, consistent with it, and just having these initial conversations, having like keeping the top of the pipeline warm the whole time, would have made my life a bit easier.
Can I just add something to that? So we have a manager named Ihar of Geek Ventures, and even when he closed his fund, he kept talking to LPs every week, and he basically has this mindset of like a million a week. I'm gonna always get a million a week, and he didn't even have an open fund. Million a week, million a week, and it's kind of an interesting mindset because then when you open fund two, if you've been building, let's say, a million a week, you might open fund two and have like 20 million ready to go because you've been on this million a week paradigm. I thought it was so fascinating that, he just keeps that million a week paradigm going. And when you start getting bigger, that might only mean 3 LP calls a week because you could get like 250s and a half a million to get there. Jessica?
Yep. That's a great segue. One of my key things that I did do and really helped was on the consistency note. I wrote that down too. But every single week, I did a week in review. It took me 10 minutes and I wrote down how many calls I had, how many, like where things were at. My goal was to have at least 15 LP calls per week. And I I had a goal every month of how many packs I wanted to get. And every week I had to like write down the number if it was low. And then it just helps you keep yourself accountable for every other solo GP out there. You need these things to keep you on track. And after VC Lab ends, you're on your own. Like you need to create that structure yourself. So that was really helpful to me to hold myself accountable. And like, I got to celebrate with myself when I hit the goal, and when I didn't, it was like, oh, I still had to write that number down and look at it. So that was helpful. And then the second is ask for the money. Like, have a Jerry Maguire moment yourself and like ask for the money. You will not get it if you do not ask. And if I were to give my past self advice, like, ask for bigger dollar amounts because you just might get them.
Yeah, I agree
I
with that
had
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's double click on that one. So was it show me the money?
Yeah.
Show me the money. So like ask for like because this is a huge. So I'll give everyone a tip. I always start with the maximum because people are like, well, what's the minimum? And I'm like, well, the maximum. So do you want to rephrase? Because I mean, how many times do you get asked? Raise your hand if you've been asked way more than you'd like. What's the minimum?
Oh, every time. Well, I think so I tried to include it in the pitch. So I would give like a range. I'd be like, oh yeah, most LPs are putting between this and this or something. Like, I wanted to, when I really got into a groove of pitching, I I didn't wait for them to ask me. I didn't wait for them to ask me what the minimum was. I was like presenting, what the range or what the average or whatever of what I wanted them to put in. Um, but I, you know, I grew up in Michigan. Like, I think there's a mindset thing here where, like a little bit of an imposter syndrome here too, where like, unless if you don't feel confident in what you're doing or like you don't hit that stride yet, it's really hard to ask for these higher amounts. Especially like if you didn't grow up with money, if like I just thought the minimum that I was asking for felt like a lot of money to me personally because I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So it took me a long time and doing some deals myself to get over that hump of saying, oh, like, no, like these people have money. They're always going to have money. They like, this is the echelon of people I'm talking to. I need to ask for it because I need to invest it. And I'm good at what I do. And yeah, and so it's like once you build that confidence, you can ask for more. But it took me a minute to get there. So yeah, fun two will be different.
Yeah, we definitely set a target ask before every meeting. So we knew what we were going to ask for. And we used that maximum as an icebreaker usually because we knew these people were not coming in for $2 million in any world. But we would say, by the way, so just to let you know, our maximum is 2 million, and they'd laugh, and and it was a good icebreaker. And then we'd tell them, yes, we're looking for 250, and that's going to be over 4 capital calls over 3 or 4 years. So it's 60. Know the numbers in your head before you go in. So it's 62.5 basically. We're asking you for the first close.
That's really great. So you use it as an icebreaker, right? Like they would laugh. By the way, our maximum is 2 million. Like, but we're only really looking for you to come in for 250. That's beautiful, actually. One of the best ways I've heard to use the maximum and a target amount in a pitch. All right, let's get to some many audience questions. Great job, everyone. Do me a favor, upvote. Drew's got the top voted question right now with 2 votes because people haven't clicked the thumbs up yet. Could the panel please speak to the overlaps and differences they observed between the LP archetypes in the first close and later closes? And you don't need to everyone take every question if someone's passionate about this one because we got lots of questions.
I mean,
For me, it was, go ahead, John.
Go
All
ahead,
right, John
Yeah, I
and
was
Jeff,
just gonna
you got it.
Yeah, I
Jessica,
was just going to say, so, the first close really was people that we had some type of existing relationship previously. And once we had that first close and we're able to have some portfolio companies and make some initial investments, that changed the archetype to people that we could talk to about our focus as to what type of companies we'd already invested in. The first close really was more of, you know, our network and who we knew that we could get $50,000 or $100,000 from to round up a first close.
Jessica, you
Yep.
want to add something?
Yeah, I would say the first close was like real believers in the thesis. Like I have a fairly mission-driven thesis. And so the first people were like believers, like community builders, like people who were in on that thesis. Because didn't have any deals at that point. And then the final close was um, more like traditional investors that they were like, oh, these numbers are good. And it was more of an economic opportunity versus thesis driven.
Speaking of which, great question to follow up on this, and anyone else can add to it as well. But we'll start with you, Jessica. Marie's asking, what did you find, or how did you find some of the best LPs that were interested in your thesis? And you brought up you had a very specific thesis, so community builders. But yeah, what was your process to find them?
So only like 12% of my LPs in the fund were my first degree connections
Wow.
before, like, yeah. So,
You put some stats out about all this stuff on LinkedIn, right?
I put I dropped some in our like Decile channel for our team to look at because they're pretty interesting, but I put a few out on LinkedIn. Yeah. Um, so I had to hustle to like find these people for sure. I think the first thing I did was I went to people like in my network that were kind of in these sectors. I looked at their LinkedIn connections and I asked them specifically, will you intro me? Are you open to introing me to a few people? If they said yes, I went to their network and I gave them 3 to 5 names and I sent them forwardable emails to each one. And that's how I got the first few LPs. So I was doing outbound, but I was making sure I was getting warm connections to that outbound, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
so
then
you were
after,
getting warm interest. Who else wants to ask? Or anyone else have an answer to that question they want to add, or we can go.
Well, I think what Jessica hit on there was actually a good point too. If you're having someone that's going to help you, make it as easy as possible for them to help you. Like she was creating the emails that they could just forward. Don't push your luck. Make it, if there's someone's helping you and they're a connector, that's awesome. So make their
yep.
job very easy.
And be specific. Like, don't say, oh, like, you know, can you refer me? Be like, no, like I see you're connected to this person. I want to meet them. Will you intro me?
Yeah, and let me add on the intros. If you don't, you want to intro the person, not necessarily the fund, just to be safe with general solicitation laws. Of course, things happen where they intro the fund anyway, but you want to encourage connectors to intro you as a person, meet the LP, and pitch them later. But as I said, things outside your control always happen. There's a lot of questions here. I like this one from Michael. How do I share my investment without looking like a scammer? Well, the good news, Michael, is you generally don't share your investment first. You have to meet someone just to follow the pitching laws and get to create rapport and then talk about the business. But I'd love to hear, since it's the top voted question, what other people have to add to that.
I mean, I think part of it is just kind of fundamental, right? Like if you are pitching somebody and you're coming off as a scammer, it's probably because you don't really have a warm intro to them, or you don't really have some sort of connection or reason why you're talking to them. And so I think if that's the case, right, just be careful again, because you don't want to end up in a general solicitation problem. So I think if you are kind of following the guidelines of getting a warm intro or being introduced or being part of a group and just introducing yourself directly, then it doesn't necessarily need to sound like a scam. It always starts to sound like a scam when you don't really know the person, or you haven't warmed them up, or you haven't really prepared them for what you're going to talk to them about.
Yep.
Speaking of which, it was you that put the teaser in your newsletter, correct, Ollie? And Michael's asking what was in your teaser in your newsletter. How did you and how did you not look like a scam to follow up with the other question by putting the teaser in the deck? Uh,
So, I think because the newsletter is only sent to people who have either asked to sign up for it or people that I've spoken with, right? It was a way to kind of there wasn't really a general solicitation problem. So I'm not opening it up to the public. I'm not putting it on like my website or anything like that. It was either people that had, reached out to me in some other format and was part of my syndicate on AngelList, had already looked at the teaser once, or somebody who I presented something to at some point. And so there was already this kind of opt-in where I think it was able to no longer be an issue from my understanding.
and what would be in the teaser then itself?
Um, it was a little bit more about the thesis, a little bit more about, the track record, more about my background and what I've done. It was sort of like a mini version of the deck that was a little bit more high level. And,
Was it one
without it
page?
was one page. And then basically I took each major section of the deck and put it into a section in the one pager and just hit the highlights. So, instead of having the full one page slide, maybe just have one or two bullets about track record or about the thesis or about, the fund structure and, all those sorts of things.
That's a great idea. Lots of questions about the newsletter here. If anyone, I mean, it sounds like you used it fairly effectively. Jessica, maybe you could tell everyone what you put in your newsletter.
Um, as I shared, like I'm a marketer by trade, and not being able to market this fund was like a killer. So the newsletter became like my only way to communicate and market with LPs. So just like Ali, my process was do the first call and then they're on the newsletter. I saw some question was like, oh, did you ask people? Um, Not really, if I'm being really honest. Like I did, unless they were a no. If they gave me a straight no, then they did not go on the newsletter. Um, so, but anyone that was like, oh yeah, like, let's stay in touch or like whatever, then like they're on the newsletter. Um, and it just became a community building thing for me. So I would put um, upfront like any funding updates, right? So I was doing closes kind of quarterly, like loosely quarterly to try to get LPs in. And so I would put updates about those closes. I announced new investments and would do a write-up of why we invested so LPs could get a sense of how I thought about the world and my perspective. Um, Once we started building a portfolio, I had a section about like portfolio progress and hyping up our portfolio. Like if they were on podcasts, if they got press, if they closed funding rounds, like that all was in there. And then I had another section about like events of these are the events I'm going to, meet me there. These are events we're hosting, sign up for them. So it was just a touch point. Sometimes I shared like person, personal anecdotes. I think it's important to, if you're going to be building this community around you, like let people know who you are and like be authentic, because at the end of the day, like people are investing in people. And like how not to be scammy, like don't be a robot. Like you're a human, you're talking to another human. I think if you come off authentically in your outreach, that shines through. If you're a fucking weirdo, like no one wants to answer that email or like that DM. So just be like cognizant of that. But if you like let kind of people into your world a little bit, they want to be a part of it
Yeah,
or they
you were one
self-select
of
in.
the Yeah, you were one of the most, sorry to cut you off there. You were one of the most popular people on our marketplace. And because we have a marketplace where we have LPs and GPs interact, and your profile talked about you being a mom living in Seattle, and like a lot of other people's profiles didn't have that kind of personal touch, and a lot of people resonated with the personal touch, and that I think really helped.
I,
Okay,
I
but
just,
we
I
have so
appreciate
many
that.
questions. Yeah, yeah. So, uh, okay, there's one kind of minutia. I'll just answer it. It's like, if we're aiming for a $5 million fund, can you take packs less than 50K? I'm curious, did you guys take any commitments under 50K? Did you, Jessica? You
Yep.
did. Did you?
My first fund size was 3 million. We ended up closing 6.6. So when it was 3 million, I
Woo!
was like, oh, thank you. I was like, oh yeah, like I can take a few 25s because that's not going to mess with my, my LP count. Um, and I think I needed to take a few 25s to just like get the momentum going. Like I used small checks very strategically as momentum builders, really in each close.
Ali and John,
we
did
didn't
you
take,
take?
we didn't take any packs under 50, but actually the very first pack that I got, which was for 100, by the time it came around to the first close several months later, he was like, oh, I can't really do it, and da da da. And I was like, what can you do? And he said, I'll do 40. And so that was the lowest. I did take that 140 because he was my very first pack. I felt like I owed him a but in any case, yeah, no packs under 50.
And you, Ali?
Yeah, I took a few. I tried for as many people as possible to push it up and to keep it kind of above 50. But for the people that I thought were strategic and you know, a lot of my LPs are actually GPs of other funds who also tend to be kind of broke. And so I think it was kind of like band of brothers type thing where I was like, I want them to be involved in the fund. I want this community support. And so if that's the situation they're in, and I had other, GPs do the same thing for me, take smaller commitments for me into their funds. So I feel like it's one of the things that we don't really talk about as much, but there is actually this huge community within VC as well that is pretty excited to be a part of.
And can I just add one thing to that is at the end of the final closing, I went back to many of my small check LPs and asked them if they wanted to double down, and many of them did. So that happens as well. If you have like legitimate numbers to show, then you can ask for that. I think at the very beginning, people are just unsure. They don't know who you are. They need to watch you for 6 months or whatever. But once they do and get comfortable, like there might be more capital there. So I recommend doing that too.
So we're down the last couple of minutes. Thanks. So which I just checked my watch because I was loving the dialogue, reading the questions. I'm like, oh my Lord. So I want to, I'll try and do questions on LinkedIn. I often do a post after a great session like this with questions and answer so everyone can see, because some of them I can just answer. But what I want to ask the panelists, final question for you guys is like, again, closing in uncertain times. We're there right now. We are seeing people close, so that's good. What like final piece of advice would you give everyone on this call? And there's good turnout. This, hey, keep this in mind. It's going to make your life easier, the process better, however you want to phrase it. Who wants to go first? Maybe John, because you went last. All right.
Yeah, so I mean, you are selling yourself, right? Like you have your fund and you have your thesis, but really at the end of the day, you're a first-time fund manager and the person is investing in you. So keep refining your story until it works. And as soon as you get a little confidence, you're going to get on a little roll and you're going to be into a first close.
Ali or Jessica? Why don't we do, why don't we go the reverse way from how we started? We'll go Ali and Jessica last.
Yeah, I think knowing what makes you special and doubling down on that. And again, like same thing with a startup, right? Like if you know what your special sauce is, and then making sure you can explain that and highlight that and don't be afraid of that and actually lean into that, right? So if that's your unique perspective, if that's your track record, if that's your thesis, like whatever it is, lean into that and double down on that as much as possible. Because you are going to find people who that resonates with. And so then kind of making that your goal of not everybody's going to love everything about you, but the ones that do love that thing that makes you special are so much easier to close and end up becoming your biggest champions.
Yep. And mine would be to be a lighthouse. Like you want to be at the center of this ecosystem, create a thesis that is memorable with like that kind of incorporates your special sauce. I think the best thing that I did was have like a one-liner for my thesis. I was like, what are the two things that I want people to remember about me and the firm after this conversation? And I made sure that they walked away with those two things. It helped with referrals for LPs and it helped with deal flow. We got a lot of inbound just from word of mouth while we were still in stealth mode because of this. So if you think of yourself as a lighthouse and you're like attracting things to you, also as a solo GP, it helps a lot with the level of effort.
This was amazing. Big round of applause. All these amazing managers have been closing in these times. In fact, Jessica's closed, John's closed. And Ali, how close are you? You're days away, right?
Yeah. By the end of the month, hopefully.
All right. Well, listen, congratulations, everyone. Thank you for all the great applause in the chat. This was one, and crazy stat. We're still at 148. Couple of minutes ago, we were at almost 190. It stayed at 190 the whole time. Like, this is great. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day. That was amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.